You're an exhibitor. We're very happy to have had your exhibits. We want to thank you for entering your exhibits and hope that you will support us going forward at our future shows. Our summer show is going to be in Milwaukee. And I hope when you go home you'll download the application for exhibiting in Milwaukee and send it in. We need your help to keep our shows going. That having been said, I'm going to introduce the chairman of our jury here, who is David McNamee, sitting here in the middle, and David is going to introduce the rest of the jury. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Well, I'd like to introduce, in alphabetical order, Ed Andrews of North Carolina, to my left here. Tim Barchi from Colorado, everybody knows him, I think. Tony Dewey from Connecticut. Hello. And Daryl Ertzberger from Virginia. Colin Fraser was a late add to the jury, does not appear in your book. He does? Oh, good. I didn't think he did.
You're real.
He is real. He's from New York. He substituted for the late David Herendeen. And we appreciate that at the last minute. Jim Mazeppa from Florida is our seventh judge. And then I'd also like to acknowledge a special consultant to the jury, Dan Walker. We could not have done our work as well, hopefully as well, as we did without Dan's help and input in educating us on the intricacies and beauty of Indian flabbing. So he was our resource on Indian flabbing. We appreciate that, Dan. Many of you have been to these sessions before, but for those who have not, let me go over a few things with you. The purpose of this feedback forum is to provide feedback so the exhibitors can achieve whatever goals they have. People exhibit for all different reasons. Some, they like to line up all of the awards they get. Other people just like to show off their stuff, and then there's kind of a lot of in-betweens. We also want to provide information for others in the room. This is a great learning space where you can listen to comments about what is good and what could be improved in these exhibits. Make a note of the exhibits, run out to the frames, and see for yourself what we've been talking about. This is the way I learned to exhibit long ago. I sat through a number of these sessions before I even started. So this is a good thing to do if you have an interest in exhibiting. Now, philatelic exhibiting, get this, is the application of certain principles that are put in the Manual of Philatelic Judging, which is available on the APS website and on the AAPE website. We have a link to it as well. This is the criteria that we use to evaluate competitive exhibits. There are other criteria that other people have, perhaps, but they're not particularly relevant to assigning a medal level to the philatelic exhibits here. This particular exhibition is special. This is the time where we bring together one of the more difficult practices we have is one frame exhibiting. There's something about trying to boil down a subject and still make a coherent, full subject, but in only 16 pages. You've got to be succinct, and it's got to have a fairly narrow focus. It's a challenge then to the judges because we see the most esoteric things you could ever imagine that come out of these things. And I'm sure that if you've looked at some of the things out there, you would agree that some of them are pretty esoteric. The other thing that we do is that we take some multi-frames are also part of this exhibition. It started out to be display, division, and illustrated mail, and what did you start it with, Tim?
Cinderella.
Cinderella, yeah, that was the other one. We had picked up a few other things along the way, but that's where we had started. So that's why you don't see so many multi-frame exhibits at this show, primarily for the single frame exhibits. Now, I want to make some comments about some things in general, and then we'll get down to the Q&A. A number of exhibits displayed some traits. Clever titles that just lack information to tell us exactly what the exhibit's going to be about. If you look in the manual, it suggests that you have a clear title that tells what the exhibit is going to be about. And you start off your title page with a purpose to tell us what you intend to do, so that we can then decide whether or not you did what you said you were going to do. Also, a plan or an outline is highly suggested for every exhibit, because that gives you a roadmap to put your exhibit together. It gives us a roadmap to follow you, to see how you develop this exhibit. The other thing is, and I won't name any names, you guys will know who you are, but we received only about 3/4 of the title pages and synopses when we started preparing for this exhibition. Fortunately, we were able to get some help to go after some of the people who hadn't turned their paperwork in, but it doesn't do you any good to not turn your paperwork in on time, because in that title page and the synopses with the references are the things that we need to prepare properly to give you the feedback that you want. So I would urge you, always turn in your synopses and your title page when you turn in your application. Even if it's just a rough draft of what you think you're going to do, it's better than just having nothing. We'd appreciate it very much. And you'll appreciate it that we can then be more prepared. The process of this show, each exhibitor will be allowed a question, one question, and then one follow-up if necessary. We will identify which judge it is that is responsible for doing the extra preparation to be your first responder. Other judges may have comments they want to make as well. We will be providing you written feedback. Most of you have exhibited before, so perhaps you're familiar with the feedback form, but we'll be providing everybody written feedback on the exhibit. So what we're talking about today, we'll be paraphrasing some of the things that will be on the written feedback. We encourage everybody to meet their first responder at the frames for a more thorough review if you feel like that would be helpful to you. But, you know, to be quite honest with you, there's 83 exhibits out there. There's 7 of us, and how many minutes in the day? So we may not be able to get to everybody who wants to see us. Exhibitors only, please, when we ask for questions. If time permits, we will allow people who are representing exhibitors to ask questions, or you can catch me afterwards and we'll hook you up with the first responder. If you can identify your starting frame number, I've got them written down here, but it would be helpful, and your title. We usually go in what we would call reverse order. We usually take those that are earned a silver medal or less for their exhibit. So, because those are the ones that perhaps need more coaching than others. And the gold medals, we may not even get to you guys, because it will take some time to go through the silver medals and below, and then the vermeils, and then if we have time, the gold medals. So, having said all that, what questions do you have, those who have a silver or below? No.
My exhibit number was 232. It was India used in Burma, the octagon obliterator. I'm a beginner, and I would appreciate any comments on how I could improve it.
So Darrell will
Yes.
start the ball rolling for us.
Okay, India used in Burma, the octagonal obliterators, and this received a silver. So this is your first shot?
It's not my first, but it's my first serious.
Okay, all right. Well, so it was pretty good for the first serious attempt then. I think this can get better. I'm sure it can. First thing up is exactly a minute ago what David said, your title page. You don't need 3 of them, first of all. That's an overriding theme through this whole exhibit. You're way too verbose. You need to cut back a lot of this. A lot of the background information is repetitious sometimes. So that title page should be 1 page, should tell us what you're going to show us, how you're going to show it to us, what the scope is, so forth. That said, when we go through your exhibit and we look at, let's take out all the extra text and things, so we're left with a little bit of material, but some very good material. So we did have the question that if we really boil this down to what was here, is there enough to fill a frame? Maybe, maybe not. That's one of your issues that you're going to have to think about hard. This is a cancel study. In other words, you're only going to talk about these octagonal obliterators. But when we're looking at a study of any philatelic subject in an exhibit, to get a high award, we want some depth to the study. We want to explore a lot of things about it as much as possible. And basically, yours comes down to, you show us an obliterator on a canceled stamp. There's a few studies of extra information on some of the types and things, and then there's a copy on cover if you can. That still comes out kind of shallow. It's up to you to figure out how can I enhance this some, more than just that. And given the rarity of some of this stuff, it may be very tough, we understand. But that's the kind of depth we're looking for a higher level. Going into your knowledge, you show a good deal of knowledge about these, but we'd still like to see more. Are earliest known use dates known? I mean, if it is, then that's a project for you. Isn't, then that's a project for you maybe to follow up on. I know that the off-cover stamps give you no clues, but try and give, it shows more research if you can tell us something like that. Earliest known use, latest known use. It goes without saying, I think here, you need more covers, and that's the hard part to start with. So, but what you need is not covers showing exactly the same usage or the same cancel. That's redundancy, and that's not going to help you. But we very much appreciated the rarity of some of this stuff. In a lot of cases, not a lot, in some cases, you've photocopied or reproduced the back of the cover to show certain markings. Those are actually irrelevant to your story. Your story is about the obliterator, the octagonal thing. Cut those out again. They're just padding, just like all the extra text that are eating up space. We'd like to see more study on the cancels about it. Okay? If you'd like more than that, we can talk later.
If you have time, I would like to.
Yeah, I'm going to be here for the rest of the day, but that's going to be,
Thank you very much.
Walt Disney, 189 to 198.
Okay, that's it.
Ed Bergen, is that
Yes.
right? Yeah. I had the pleasure of seeing this exhibit previously. I think it was Milwaukee. Is that
No,
right?
not Milwaukee, no.
Not Milwaukee,
I forget where it is.
but I saw it.
Yes, okay.
Yeah, this received a silver. The problem with this exhibit, its treatment suffers from wandering too far away from the division classification. The manual, which was shown a little earlier by David, has very specific requirements for in two categories. In the postal division, there's first day covers. And in first day covers, you carry through a traditional portion with the stamp. So you're going to show some archival material, essays, proofs, whatever, if they're available. You're going to show some of the production material, plate blocks, sheets, whatever. And then you're going to get into the first days, which include first day cities. If there were other cities, you're going to show them, that sort of thing. Cachets are secondary, but should be shown in that. In illustrated mail, which is generally after 1920, is the cachet first day cover. And there the emphasis is on the cachets and the cachet maker. In other words, how the cachet is developed. It clearly follows first day covers because that's the reason the cachets are there, but the emphasis is on the cachets itself. You still have to treat the upfront portion, the traditional portion, but not to the extent that you would with the postal first day cover. You've done that very well here. In other words, the treatment of the traditional aspect that relates to the stamp itself was enough that it wasn't overbearing, and it set up the story that you needed to tell now about how that stamp ended up on this cover. The problem is you have an admix between the first day cover exhibit and the illustrated mail cachet exhibit. And you've introduced a third component, which is the one that really gives you the problem, and that's the display.
Pardon?
The display component. In other words, you have too much non-philatelic material, not paraphilatelic material. Paraphilatelic material is acceptable in these exhibits and is generally something that is directly related to an official office like the U.S. Post Office, which would be the commemoration programs and things of that nature. But when you start putting in a lot of newspaper clippings and other kinds of ancillary material that is unrelated to U.S. Post Office officially released materials, then you're introducing display class non-philatelic material in an exhibit. Some of that is big stuff too, and it becomes very splashy and it detracts from the overall exhibit. So the treatment you have to wrestle with here is, what am I going to do with this exhibit? I have two choices in my view and in the view of the jury. One is to make it a display exhibit. You've already got the basis for that, and you've got a lot of non-philatelic material. You could find a lot more to bring in. You could get rid of certain things that really are not that important. For instance, you've got photos of one of the cachet makers, but that artist who did those cachets only did add-on cachets. Well, the add-on cachets from the first day cover viewpoint aren't as important as the ones that were actually used on the first day of issue, because they were added much later for philatelic purposes. They weren't added at the time of issue as a true memorial to the stamp. The other way to approach it would be to get rid of all of the display material and pick one of these two categories, either postal first day cover and do it that way, but I think you're going to be better off in the illustrated because you've got so much of that cachet material, especially some of the artwork and so forth. That'd be the way to go, to tighten it up. It may be a smaller exhibit, but it will be a much tighter exhibit and it'll tell the story a lot better. And I'll be happy to walk through the frames with you.
I would like you to do that,
if you'd
sure.
like later.
Okay.
The 157 to 64, Lost in the Sea.
Tim, I think that's yours. I think that's yours.
This is certainly an interesting and very aggressive task that you took on. And I think one of the initial issues that I had was the title. Again, not so minor, but you say from Revolutionary War to end of Full Sail. Well, there's not really much in the way of Revolutionary War there. So you're kind of putting yourself into a little box on the type. But, you know, something like Gloucester and its marriage to the sea from early times to commercial decline, or something along that line. I'll have most of this written down. I think one of the main issues we had was the appearance of balance on one side. It looks like you had a picture postcard exhibit and an illustrated mail exhibit, and then you started taking one chunk and put it. So when you step back and look at it, you've got a blob of pictures, and you got a blob of IMs and receipts. And the flow of the material in the exhibit don't seem to really go together very well. There seems to be some disconnect in the fluidity of the material. But that being said, there's also appears to be, to us, a lot of relevance issues. If we're focusing on Gloucester, much of the material you're showing is not in Gloucester. It's topically related because you're talking about nets, but it may be a receipt from Boston for a net company. And unless there's a direct relationship to Gloucester, we kind of felt that there's a relevance issue for a lot of your material. I think that's one of the main, it just seems like this is topically driven and not purpose driven. If you concentrate more on the Gloucester material and develop the story to where it actually has a life to it, I think, and again, I'll have this on your page, possibly a slight change in the plan and a collapse of the plan and more concentration, instead of 8 frames, possibly 5 frames, may make it flow better. You gonna be here tomorrow morning?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's talk at the frames tomorrow, because this is kind of abstract stuff, and I think it's much better to do it at the frame.
264 Gandhi.
Well, that's me.
You would get it,
Malik, is that correct?
Yes.
Ah, okay. Yeah. Very important issue, obviously, memorializing Mahatma Gandhi. Difficult material to find, especially on cover, expensive material to find, as the case may be. This is a one-frame exhibit, received silver. This exhibit chose to use the double-page format, which is a very good format to use, especially for oversized material, because you can manipulate it much better than you can on single pages. However, a lot of that double-page format was unfortunately wasted because there's a lot of open space that could have been used, and there was too much verbiage. You have to remember with these kinds of exhibits that you have to be as succinct as possible to tell the story that you're trying to tell. So this can be tightened up considerably. The jury also thought this was a much broader topic and could really be satisfied with one frame exhibit. If you read, again, the manual, it says that in 16 pages you're going to tell a story from its beginning to its end. And the level of completeness has to be very high. Now, yes, you've got a lot of esoteric covers in here and values that are difficult to find. You claimed, for instance, that the 10 rupee was probably the only one left. I found 2 expensive ones, but I found them on eBay. And they were not first-day covers. One was August 24th and one was September 1st. So material is available. In an exhibit of this type, what we normally look at when you're showing the uses of an issue, you should show each of the denominations and its intended rate use. 4 denominations. So you should have a good solid cover for each one of those denominations showing how its intended rate was to be satisfied. Then you can show some add-on uses where you have multiple stamps in the same cover. Try to use as many service and government overprint stamps as possible, and any kind of odd services that might have been available at the time of the issue would be very desirable. And then for foreign usages, the more exotic locations are the things that you really need to look for. So there's a lot more work that can be done. You have an excellent start, but we think it's broader than a one-frame exhibit. And with the material you've got a very solid core to begin to build upon. And I'll be happy to talk to you at the frames if you want.
Sure, thank you.
Frame 254, special adhesive stamps out of February, India.
This is Darrell, silver.
Okay. Well, basically you tell us on your title page that you're going to study all of these one type of revenue, the special adhesives, and there are 24 values on them. You show us all the 24 values. That's a lot to cover in depth in 16 pages. Let's do the math here. Plus, when you add on that they're going to be found used on monsters, pieces of paper, how are you going to cram this in one frame? That's your big problem right there, yeah. I mean, and the key words there is the study in depth again, too. I think this is a start to a study. It's very good, and we did appreciate that. But basically, we're just crying out for more of a little bit of everything. And again, that little bit of everything is going to shove you out of that one frame in 2 seconds. But your knowledge shown was pretty good, but we're still asking for more. Plate size. What's the plate size? Marginal marking. Yeah, the rates on the documents are hard, but you're going to have to try and take a stab at it and break it down somehow about what the fee paid other than just say, this adds up to 1 rupee and 4 cents or whatever it was. Try and take a stab. That's going to kick you up higher anytime you can do that. So, yeah, that's the real basics there. I mean, if you want more, I can give you more, but you got the idea.
There's one key item, and I'll review right just a second. One key item, and I just want to reiterate for the rest of the crowd. When you're going to do an exhibit of covers, postal history, you have to explain what the cover is, the rate, the route, the postal markings. When you do an exhibit of revenue on document, you need to do the same thing. You need to say what the document is, what it was used for, especially if it's written in a language other than English. Is this a contract? Is this some other kind of deal? And then you need to hopefully can cite the rule, regulation, or law and calculate that the fee is correct on the document. That's the top of the line way you do a revenue exhibit. So for those of you who want to try that, it takes a lot of research, especially talking about non-U.S. documents. It takes a lot of research, especially to find out what the rules were to calculate the revenue correctly, to verify it. Yes, sir.
We're Confederate generals, 124 to 130, 125 to 134.
That's Jim.
Okay, very good.
Title of the exhibit, Confederate Generals Mail 1861 to 65. First of all, your title page is quite clear. It tells us what you're going to do, and indeed you fulfill what you say you're going to do. The problem becomes a treatment issue. In looking at it, it was first hard to decide what you're trying to show, the philatelic element or the Confederate general element. And looking at it, about 40% of the real estate of your exhibit is to the philatelic part, and about 60% to the general part. Now, the major problem we have with that is it's a treatment issue. because the way you have your presentation structured, it's really more of an educational presentation. Now, here's what I mean by that. We exhibit for 3 reasons, and David touched on some of those earlier. You know, one of them is for medal. We love the competition, try to make our exhibits better. Secondly, because we just love our little children, we like to see them in the frame. And thirdly, to educate the public. And your exhibit is a wonderful example of an educational presentation. However, it falls out of the category of a philatelic presentation because it does not fit any of the exhibiting classes or divisions that we have in the manual. And that's where the problem lies. And because of that, it makes it somewhat difficult to critique it, but I just will give you a few observations. You know, first of all, you know, this is the kind of presentation I'd love to see in a city hall someplace or in a museum because you touch on both philatelic elements, but and then with the general. So there's a lot of historical knowledge in there, as well as some of the philatelic knowledge. The problem becomes that the educational knowledge about the generals just overwhelms what's there. It overwhelms the philatelic stuff. And the philatelic material that's there is absolutely outstanding. It's absolutely outstanding. But the layout as it is, the pictures and the big boxes and the photos simply overwhelm the philatelic elements that you have there, and it detracts from the philatelic aspects. But having said that, do understand, you have to find a way to make this into a philatelic exhibit according to what we have in the manual, and move it from that educational presentation, which is excellent, until more of a philatelic presentation.
I downloaded your manual. Everything on that exhibit lines up exactly as it is in the manual. I beg to differ with you with your percentage because I would say it's 60% philatelic and only 40% the other because I'm the one that laid it out and I measured it.
Okay.
Okay. The second thing is it does tell the story all the way through. Philatelic part is 100%. Is as it lines up with this. Okay.
Okay, Ed has.
Let me respond on display exhibits. You submitted this as a display exhibit. Is that the part of the manual that you're referring to?
No, this was originally a postal history exhibit.
Ah.
Because you don't have a postal history class, we entered it as a display. To make it a display, we put the original letters in. With the original letters out in the postal history, this wins gold all the time.
Well,
But by taking 3, 5, or 7 generals out and put the letters in for the ones that were left, we got knocked all the way down to a silver, and that's what I don't understand.
well, as a display exhibit, it doesn't have original material, that's the problem.
But one of the
It has
problems is
mostly-
you can't
it has
get original
mostly
material for that.
scans.
It's
It has
not
mostly
existent.
Scans are not allowed in display exhibits.
Sir?
Only original material, original photographs, original letters, fine. Original newspaper articles, anything original arm patches from the general, bullets from
But unfortunately, sir, this does not exist. I mean, that's the whole problem. There may be possibly 24 of those photographs are available as a photograph. The rest of them are not.
That's,
So,
We
and
did
this,
not pick the subject.
that's all we can handle here. You'll have to deal with this at the frames so that we can get to some of the other folks.
well, I'm sorry you're ducking it.
Yes.
206, 2 St. Hardy.
Hello, Dan.
They want to
How
have
are you?
Fine, thank you.
different frames.
This is a one-frame exhibit. I had the pleasure of seeing this exhibit before also. And I think we talked about some of the issues relating to the approach that's been used for this exhibit. And the jury felt pretty much the same as I have in the past. This is a very broad subject for a one-frame exhibit. you have to decide in a one-frame exhibit, again, when you read the manual, it says it is a complete story from beginning to end in 16 pages. So if you're treating this as a first day cover exhibit, then you have to go to the postal section of first day cover exhibits and say, what is entailed in that? It requires archival material, it requires production material, and it requires the first day covers that the cities, the primary cities and the secondary cities and so forth, plus any important caches and so forth. We've attempted to do that. We attempted to do that by using first day covers, and we did put in some archival material up front, but it's certainly not complete. Even the most important caches, which are 16 caches, are not fully represented. And there is one page there of add-on caches, which is, I don't think appropriate at all for what you're trying to accomplish. This is really a multi-frame exhibit. I think I mentioned to you before, if you go to the American Philatelic Research Library and request the Alan Burkus exhibit, it's 5 frames, I believe it's 5 frames. It's a beautiful first day cover exhibit of this material. And it clearly says that to squeeze something like that into one frame, just look at your bottom row. You try to get every one of those cities in there by putting one cover right on top of the other to the point where it looks good. So it becomes unattractive, and it's also not complete. And that's why it's going to be hard to move this up metal-wise until that exhibit expands, or we figure out some other way to focus it down to a complete story in 16 pages. And I'll be happy to go to the frames with that.
Jim has a short
Just a short comment here. As far as expanding this, the way you start out, with two of the most gorgeous pieces with that sunken die-proof and that copper wash, whatever. I mean, those are just exquisite. And when you have that, everything else filling in the bottom of the rest of it. So, very excellent.
But you're supposed to put the most important, at eye level, about the second row.
That's fine where it is.
If those belong at the beginning.
That's fine where it is. That's fine where it is. Don't move.
Okay.
David?
Yes. Go ahead, Tim.
You know, this is in a very formative time, if you want to call it formative, time of the original cachet makers and cover services. As such, there is nothing wrong with doing a one-frame exhibit on the story of the original cachet makers of this rather historic design and focus on the first day services and cachet makers. And you've got your map on there showing the railroad. That's a story in itself. You don't have to sit there and focus on the stamp issue. You don't have to do the whole 3 yards.
So would that be in postal history then, or as opposed to traditional?
It's going to be a one-frame class exhibit. You set up the ground rules, and this applies to everybody. You set up the ground rules. This is what I want to do and why, and this is how I'm going to develop the story. Now, you have to convince the jury that it is a logical and acceptable task that you're setting yourself up to. But given the subject that you're dealing with, in the very formidable years of cachet makers and servicers, that's certainly, in my mind, something that's quite suitable to try and develop in 16 pages. That means you don't have to show foreign uses. You don't have to show all this other stuff. You don't have to show the stamp. You're focusing now, just like on a first day cover exhibit, you're focusing on the cachets and the makers and what they did and how they did it. That's a story.
So it wouldn't be a traditional exhibit anymore?
No, it's going to be a first day
Because
cover
I
exhibit.
wouldn't show the production part.
No. You're focusing. If you choose to maintain your corral as a one-frame exhibit, you're going to trot your pony in 16 pages.
Yeah.
You can't do it the way it is now and do much better than you are. But if you choose to select a certain hoof on the horse and focus on that, it can work if you make your case
Want to follow that up with him and Frank?
Yeah, I'm off on silver.
All right, do we have any other silvers? Yes.
221, earliest known documented usages, and I'll
Okay, that's me. 221, earliest known documented uses then and now, which also received a silver medal. This was a very complicated exhibit for the judges to follow the purpose of the exhibit. As we interpreted it, it was basically a methodological exhibit of how to identify, classify, and codify earliest known usages. You split it into certain periods, essentially before there was a year date in the cancellation, then a sort of transitional period when they started to announce specific earliest uses, and then a final period where things happened but nobody bothered to tell anybody that it was happening. That in a nutshell is what the exhibit is. Now if you step back from that, you basically have a subject that in its full development is really something quite large. What you've done, you've split it down, particularly in your section 1, into a whole group of, I think, 7 sections in part 1, and a smaller number of sections in part 2, and then a smaller number of sections in part 3. What you have is an awful lot going on. So you have a big subject, you've got it divided into lots and lots of subparts. And as a result, you end up with a story that's very, very complicated. And you end up jumping back between pages to try and really follow what's happening. The exhibit, I think, would move forward in meta level if, in fact, you simplify the storyline. If you actually said, these are the points I really want to make, maybe 3 or 4 specific points, and you emphasize those, you just have too many things happening all at once. Now, I think if you and I spend maybe 5 minutes tomorrow, I can show you exactly what I mean.
Okay.
That in a nutshell is what you need to do. You need to just simplify everything, make it easy to follow, cut down on the number of sections and categories that you've got. And then I think everything will fall, hopefully, really into place. And I don't know if anybody else has anything to say, but that, as we saw it, was really the key point.
It's a very novel concept that you're trying to do. And it was, first of all, we had to get on board with you, and that was one of the problems.
That was the problem,
That was the problem. Your train was already moving off the station, and we were having to try and run after it. So I would encourage you to continue to do that, because it's an interesting, a very interesting synoptic approach to a methodology of evaluation of first days and earliest known uses. So I applaud you for what you tried to do. It just, we didn't know what we were at first. It took us a while.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Other silvers or below, are there any left that would like to ask a question? Okay. We'll deal with Vermeys at this point. Are there any Vermeys? Yes, sir.
Yeah, frame 120 to 124, machine weighted postage labels of USA.
Hello, Dr. Park.
Yeah, hi.
I have the pleasure, I think it was the first time you showed it during my very first apprenticeship. And the exhibit has come a long way since then, and it has really become a good exhibit. And I'm glad to see that you pursued it and kept at it. You have a good title page. Let's see. But the end of your exhibit doesn't have the same balance and treatment that you did at the beginning. You go into great detail at the beginning. Your last frame seems to be hurried. You have, you know, several different issues all in that one frame and give them very short treatment as opposed to the in-depth treatment that you give to the beginning and middle part of the exhibit. That last frame kind of looks like, oops,
Yeah.
you know, and crammed it in. I have an 8-frame or whatever, the 5-frame exhibit, and I really should have, you know, gone into the 6th.
I'm writing the 6th frame.
Yeah, the usages of that material in the last frame need to be found.
Yeah.
And it's not, you know, especially the current stuff. I mean, I'm, you know, if you're an eBay buyer, for
Yeah.
instance,
Yeah.
a lot of the sellers are using those facilities for sending it, so
Yeah.
buy stuff on eBay and have them send it to you.
No, I'm writing. I mean, I've already written 6 sheets and 10 more to write. I mean, I have the material.
So you can find this material, it's commonly in use now. It appears that page 4 in that last frame is out of sequence. It's like 2000, I forgot what it is. But
2009 and then
you
2000,
go-
yeah.
So you kind of.
No, I just,
Try to
that they are still doing the experimentation, is going on.
Yeah, but I'm saying there's you know, the dates, so it looks like 2012 pages here, and then you go 2008, 2009, 2010. You know, there's page.
Okay, all right.
Take a look at it.
Yeah, yeah, maybe I made a mistake.
For the very first issue, you have the 2 first day sets,
Yeah.
but I missed it in your write-up if it's there. You don't mention that there were only 3,000 sets possible.
Yeah, they printed only 3,000 sets. Yeah.
Right, but
I didn't write. Yeah, I should write.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
you know, to show that you
Yeah,
know that
yes.
they're pretty tough to count. Commercial versus philatelic covers. Kind of misuse of the word commercial. Commercial meaning business as opposed to personal mail. And again, that is one of the points that you've heard this from many juries over there. You need more of the non-philatelic ones. I know they're a challenge, especially if you're early stuff, but that's
I'm
where
still
you're
looking.
going, that's where you're going to really advance the
Yeah.
exhibit.
Yeah.
You have nice errors, varieties, great stuff, but you don't highlight your key items. And matter of fact, one of your very best item in there, which I had told you 3 years ago to go find,
Yeah.
and you went, you actually found one, which is a UPU use
Yeah.
of one of these vended machine devices. Those are extremely tough to find.
Yeah, I know.
And you've got it tucked into the corner on its edge. It's like you're trying to hide it for some reason. No, show us the, you know, really
Yeah.
put your good stuff out there and let us see it. Presentation, quickly, consider using pages that take up 1/3 of a row. You have a lot of modern material in there, all modern material,
Yeah.
and, which are usually on big rounds, not like, you know, 19th century envelopes and trolling goods big. So, I have a modern exhibit, which is almost like all number 10 covers, and uses a 1/3 size page, so you can put your covers, and you don't, and one thing that really is detracting from the exhibit is when you write up the page as opposed to across the page, you know, trying to read this way as well as looking at your cover sideways. And that would really help. Really love to see this exhibit, and you brought it along
Yes.
really far. I applaud you.
Yeah, thank you.
Next. Yes, sir.
On number 218, the Huguenot loan. Now, we did this earlier today. Do you have, I'm just wondering if anybody else has anything additional to add to it?
Yeah, I went over this. Quickly recap what you're doing. Yeah, sure. I was saying that to have a cohesive story here, again, you've got an issue. The issue has several values. We'd like to see single value use as much as possible, even though it's the foreign destinations. Given the time span of the use of the stamp, you have to go to Tony W.'s book, and you have to look at all the rates that are possible for foreign usage. I've written down a number of those rates that aren't represented in the study on 16 pages. There are some wonderful things in there, there's no question about it. Some of the destinations are common destinations, foreign destinations. However, they do have some unusual services associated with them for which there's extra credit given. It's mostly the UPU study at the present time with a lot of add-on, and getting those single rate uses would be very useful, as well as additional services and fees. So I don't know if the rest of the board has.
Anybody else? Thank you. Next, Jessica.
242, traveling corridors.
That's me. This is varieties and errors of the potch issues in given feudatory states in receipt of a May medal. One of the difficulties with single frame exhibiting is choosing the limits or the parameters within which you're going to exhibit. And in this case, you've chosen simply to show varieties and errors. One of the difficulties which you have in imposing such limits is whether those limits are justifiable and logical. The definition of errors and varieties which you've chosen include not just what one would call production errors, that is to say double prints, inter-betweens, inverted overprints. You also include a number of other things. For example, on page 2, you show a number of shade variations which you ascribe to plate pressure. And I think in applying the definition that you have, you've slid in a number of things that probably would be better left out. And I think those shade variations would be an example of that. So if you basically tightened up the definition to a more specific thing that you're dealing with, essentially major production errors. So going back to what I said, the double prints, inverted overprints, imperf-betweens, things like that. Again, on the title page, you chose to show the essays for the issue. Now again, you chose to put those on the title page. However, they don't again fall within the parameters of the title that you selected. So again, either revisit the title to give a more logical, cohesive boundary to the exhibit so that those essays directly fit within your title, or choose to leave them out. The option is yours, but at least bring a concordance between what is included and the title that you've adopted. Write-up and the text that you've provided. You've divided the exhibit very logically into issue by issue, and that makes sense. It's very helpful taking the viewer through the exhibit. However, at the beginning of each section, you include a very, very large block of text with a tremendous amount of information, not just about the errors and varieties that you're showing, but about that particular series in general. So for example, in at least one case, you talk a lot about forgeries of a specific issue. Again, that falls outside of the scope of the title that you define, and you're not showing any anyway. So really, again, revisit those big blocks of text, eliminate the information that's essentially redundant under the title that you have chosen. And that will help to free you up some space because many of your pages are very, very congested. So again, work within the space that you have. The title page, like many of those other pages, also has a tremendous amount of information on it. Reduce a lot of the information that is not directly relevant to the title, scope, and content of the exhibit. There's also a fair amount of repetition of information, and I know sometimes repetition helps. It conveys the message that you're trying to send, but in 16 pages, you don't always have that luxury. So for example, paragraph 1 and paragraph 4 of the title page, you're basically saying the same thing again. So again, revisit the text, reduce the amount of repetition and redundancy in the information. Highlighting the important items. You do an interesting idea, a single thin black line, a thicker black line, and then a relatively thick red border. So essentially, every single piece in the exhibit has a degree of highlighting, if I interpreted you correctly. The thick and the thin black borders are a little bit hard to differentiate and to follow. Maybe within the single frame, it might be helpful just to focus on the single red border for the most important items. Emphasize the key pieces, giving us an indication of, shall we call it, minor importance, slightly more important, and then very important. Probably focus only on the very important. As I say, it's hard sometimes to tell the thick and the thin black lines. The red works very well, so I would probably confine it to that. Finally, or my final comment, is a completely different perspective. You've chosen to show varieties and errors. However, the 16 pages are basically arranged simply chronologically. Something you might want to consider exploring is a more subjective arrangement rather than a simple chronological one. Maybe the subject will lend itself to some other form of treatment rather than just going through issue by issue chronologically. If you want to emphasize those varieties and errors, experiment with some alternative arrangements and treatments organization. I can't necessarily say one approach would be better than another, but maybe spend some time and experiment with alternative structuring to the exhibit. See how it looks to you. See if it gets across the message more effectively that you want to convey.
Would that mean something like have a section for imperfs, another section for inverted overprints,
It's
another
possible.
section for
It's
double
possible.
prints?
Try absolutely. Now I emphasize experiment. It may be you do it and you say this really doesn't work, but try it. I think you might find it helpful, and I think you might find that the exhibit is more rewarding for you, and that you feel it's an improvement. So I would experiment, and you don't necessarily have to exhibit it to experiment. You can experiment with it at home, see how it looks to you. Again, I'd happily spend a few minutes tomorrow if that works for you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Okay, next. Yes, you.
Frame 262, the 1854 issues of India.
Oh, good.
This is the Ed Andrews show, isn't it?
D-pad, is that right?
Yes.
Yes. Well, some extraordinary material. You should have an armed guard standing next to it. This received a Vermeer. It is a one-frame exhibit. And the jury felt that despite impact of the extraordinary value and beauty of this material, which it is, that it's much too broad a subject for one frame exhibit. One of the recommendations was, after caucusing and thinking about the various issues, that the two animal, because of the number of trimmings and other ancillary things that are associated with the two animal, might fit much better for a single one frame. Remembering, a one frame has to be an inclusive story from beginning to end and complete as possible. So to deal with everything from the half anna that was not issued all the way to the 4 anna, which has a whole bunch of varieties, some of which you've shown and others of which you haven't, becomes a real challenge in a single 16-page exhibit. It appears as if these are album pages that have been put into an exhibit frame. So the story has to flow a little better and be a little more cohesive. And attempt, when you do that, to show more philatelic knowledge. You show a lot of philatelic knowledge about describing the elements, but you could do more. I mean, several extraordinary pieces of the inverted 4 anna head, of course. And there's one cover in there, the incoming Bombay cover. When I looked at the date, I realized that's one of those pre-dates. There's several covers that are known 2 weeks out before the issue was made in October. And you haven't highlighted the fact that this is a pre-date cover, which you probably should, because I assume those are extraordinary. The other failing of this exhibit was the lack of receiving a synopsis and a title page ahead of time. We had no idea what to expect, so I ordered a lot of material from APRL. It cost me a lot of money. But now it's in my library, so I thank you for that. But it's really important for us to be able to help you better understand what to do if we know what to expect. So again, I'd be happy to go to the frames with you. I don't know if anybody else has any comments.
Sure. Thank you.
Frame 250, study in black and white, good post office department.
There, sure. It lacks color, that's one comment.
Pretty bland.
Well, yes, this received a vermeil. This is a study of the post office officials, which were issued in black ink on white paper. And your emphasis on black and white and the criteria that you placed on this exhibit, that it basically only be black and white, is actually your downfall rather than your success here, I think, because it's an arbitrary condition you put onto the exhibit. And we still want to have you fulfill the condition that you study the issue in depth. And when we start looking at that, because of what you're doing, it forces you to start admitting some things that probably should be in here to really tell the full story of these issues of stamps. You say up front that this excludes the red specimen overprints. Well, but that's another issue, aspect of these stamps, that you're not getting the cover. It kicks out any color cancels. You got some lovely fancies in there on one page, but they're all black. Some of the colored ones are more spectacular than any of those. And in your usage, you go so far as to say, I'm not even going to have what is the standard envelope, the canary envelope on these. And that then eliminates a lot of opportunity to show the usage in the lower values that is more interesting than what you've got there. Now, let's say we went and put all of that into there. We put the color washed essays in. You're not fitting in one frame anymore, are you? There's your other problem. So, I mean, the knowledge level you're showing on this is extremely, extremely high. You know, it's great material. it's well presented for what it is. It's just that your restriction that you put in it, I think, instead of being something to celebrate, I think was more like shackles on it. So that was our take on this.
I guess there's no putting anything over on it. There's no putting anything over on it.
What I think that was alluded to before was that you can make any premise you want and create any exhibit you want from that premise. But if we don't buy the premise, then it will suffer a little bit. Next, Vermeer. Kathy.
235 Salon Aircraft.
You always draw the short straw and get me, don't you?
Yes, you do.
There is so much going on in this exhibit, based upon your plan and your exhibit and scope statement. You were trying to do so much in 16 pages that we actually lost focus on what it was you had really done, which was in the middle 2 rows, a little over 2 rows of the exhibit, which is your study of the form and the typology of the form and the use of the Indian forms and not just the Ceylonese forms. Instead of going the earth-cooled route and trying to tell us how this whole system works, which is very appropriate for a multi-frame exhibit, but in 16 pages, it eats up a lot of stuff up front. And while I appreciated that one picture, photograph that you had of the processing place, if you limited that to a title and put something possibly more pre-stuff, explanatory stuff on the title page, and spent maybe a couple of pages bringing this on, and then making what I perceive as the purpose of your exhibit is to type the forms and let that grow and make that the point of your exhibit. Get rid of page 16. That's page 15 is the way to end it. They stopped using the forms. Here's a form that wasn't reduced. It got used in an airmail envelope. We're done with the aircrafts. 16, I think, is really irrelevant in my opinion. But, and maybe even the commercial section may or may not be important, but make what it is the real importance of what you've done with this material. Make that the purpose of your exhibit. And, to be honest with you, it took me almost 15 minutes of looking at that and going through page by page and reading everything you did to go, I get it now.
Sounds like I got my frame fee out of you.
That's a first.
But it was so busy, we got lost.
Sure.
And there are a few exhibits on the floor that were like that. You're trying to do too much. But if you confuse us, that's not doing anybody any good. So focus on what you would, and the research you did on it, I really appreciate it. I mean, that's fly specking. That's kind of near and dear to my heart, so I appreciate it. You don't have to buy anything, you don't have to add anything. You redo that and you'll be rewarded, I think, as you should.
Thank you.
Other Vermeers?
I'm Daniel Piazza. He's at the Syracuse Louisville basketball game on the street. But he asked me to take notes if you.
Right, but I'll have to cover that at the end.
Okay.
Those that are representing exhibitors, we're all agents. We deal with that after the people who are here. But I'm happy to do that, and I'm the responder, by the way. So make sure you get a hold of me. Other Vermeers in the room. Kathy.
Salon Slave Island. I got Ed's, but if anybody else had any comments. And that is 135.
135. Yet again.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kathy and I met at the
Yeah,
frame.
so does anybody
It
else.
appeared to me, Kathy, that the entire exhibit was contained on the title page. After that, what were you gonna tell me? I mean, there's all the markings. So I mean, there was a lot of stuff in there, but, you know, I don't know, it wasn't as succinct as I thought it was gonna be.
It's a Markopoly exhibit masquerading with the display dress on. One of the things I would not recommend you do is go by reins.
Mhm. Mhm.
Ed's told
Great
you
minds
that,
are thinking
I'm
alike,
sorry.
yes, yes.
Yeah, it's a Markopoly study, and if you choose to develop it that way, that's fine. If you want to do display, you need to start scrounging around for other things and try and get it away from the Markopoly development by Rain, and use the development of the post office in conjunction with what was going on in the island and its trade and commerce. It's you and Paul should get together, because a lot of stuff Paul did is what you should do, and some of the stuff you did maybe Paul could use in a little different way. There are
babies or bacon Gloucester too.
God knows, in the 18th century, who knows?
I say that because in her exhibit, the big thing in the middle that always attracts your eye is a cut out of, probably like out of Harper's Weekly from the 19th century. It's got to be apocryphal, where the white hunter goes to clean the crocodiles out of Slave Island and he uses native babies.
Doesn't sound politically correct to me. Those who might think that the display division is an easy way to go, it's actually a fairly difficult discipline, because you have to have a great variety of items, not just non-philatelic items. You have to have a variety of them, and they have to all be relevant. And the exhibit works best if it's purpose-built, and it's not just a modified thematic or a modified postal history. So, next, Bernays. Seeing none, we'll take some gold medals. Bruce, I only recognize you because I've got you. I haven't had a chance to say much.
There's 236.
Version registration label and used as postage 1894-1912, received a gold medal. I don't have a whole lot to say here. I'm just puzzled though why page 16, the varieties, is the way you're going to end this thing. It appeared that the variety of the label belongs up where you're talking about the label, but I leave that up to you. It seemed like it should be towards the beginning of the exhibit rather than at the end. I would commend you folks in the room who are interested in some good technique to go out and take a look. It's an excellent display of knowledge. It's a good way of showing rarity, although Baruch's favorite word is only. Just about every page has something that is
I edited some of them out, some
quite,
I took some out, I forgot all of it. I didn't know.
But no, it's excellent material. It's very well presented. The only way I could say that, in my opinion, it could be improved would be take a look at the order of the pages and that number 16 varieties. Thank you for showing me. Next goal, yes, sir.
Okay. 147 to 156.
That's me. Woody Guthrie.
Yeah.
They display exhibit.
This is a display, it's a good one. You have a good plan page, and you follow it, which is appreciated. Good diversity of material, which is one of the key factors in a display exhibit. Much like the thematic, where you have this 150 different types of elements that a thematic can have. Well, you take that and add to it everything else. And Steve has, including his taxi license from when he drove a taxi in New York City.
You notice I put one CTO for the same philatelic variety in there. I wrote it up as such.
But you also don't let the collateral material overwhelm. The ending of your exhibit, you winced. You knew this is coming, didn't you? The last, what is it, 10 pages or so?
Like the section on the stamp. Right?
Yeah, that's not, you have what is called a thematic display exhibit. Because you have a story and you're illustrating it with the material. The last 10 pages turns into a story about the stamp, as opposed to about Woody Guthrie. I would suggest that, yeah, you can have, like one last page perhaps on that, but a better ending would be the great legacy of Woody Guthrie.
That could be an
He
exhibit.
influenced quite a number of musicians. And although you have one, you have Dylan in there, but there were a lot more, you know.
Yeah, but I consciously chose not to because that could be 10 frames of its own, so I basically cut over the
Well,
time
you
you
don't
guys.
have to have everybody, just, you can go with, the key people, as opposed to.
That's 6 frames.
I mean, if you did Beethoven and everybody that was in Beethoven, you'd have 150 frames. But no, you can narrow it and end the exhibit that way as opposed to, here's the story of the stamp. Let's see. I would also ask that you consider using 2 different fonts to distinguish your story, your thematic storyline from the information you give about your material. And that is also key in the display exhibit, that you have actually 2 tracks to follow. One is your story, Woody Guthrie. And then you're also expected to show knowledge about the material that you put in the exhibit, whether it's philatelic, philatellogical, or otherwise. You tend to just, in your write-up, put both into the same paragraph, mushing it together. So if you could separate those out, it'd be easy to follow the 2 tracks. Either, separate them physically, a statement for your theme, and then a statement about the material. Maybe make one point 11, the other point 10. Maybe different fonts, one italic, one. But separate those out, make it easier so that people can follow both tracks as opposed to having it all mushed together. Great knowledge of the subject, and I know you're very knowledgeable of Woody Guthrie. But in my opinion, you're just a little too heavy on the songs. And I know, of course, you're a musician, guitar player, and you and I have even sung together.
But it's both his life and his songs.
Yes, but it would be, I would like to see more of the story about him. Details like when he was at KFVD with his radio show. Could be a corner card cover from the radio or a promotion advertisement or something from, and it'd be great if it would be a promotion of his radio
I
show.
would be there.
I mean, I did see, I might have missed it, mention of his partner at that radio show, Maxim Christman, and so on throughout.
I mentioned it in passing without any item showing.
Okay.
If I had it, it would be that.
Your material is usually in great condition. We have a couple of pieces which are not up to your standard, and because of that, they stick out like sore thumbs.
Like the real photo postcard near the beginning.
Yeah.
But it was tough.
And there's a couple of covers in there that are pretty ratty. So try to make an effort to try to, either use another element, not asking for an absolute replacement of those, but those do stick out. Let's see.
Probably all.
received drawing. Consider adding like timeline at the bottom so we can follow along. I mean, you have it by the time period of his life, but without dates. So it's like the California period, it's like, okay, so that was 1937 to 1939.
Right.
You know, maybe a timeline, or even just putting the dates into the header so that we keep track of time. That's about it. Oh, and thank you for putting the UN code in there.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's your first issue. I got that in for you.
Okay, I think Tim wants to see you afterwards to make a comment for you.
No, actually,
And I do
don't
too,
comment either,
but,
but we're just gonna brag on it, but that's okay.
You can brag on it all the time.
other goals, yes, sir.
140 through 146.
That's me. I should think. See if I can find it here. Oh, there it is. Okay, this exhibit is developed along traditional lines. That means that we're showing stamps from the production of the stamp through the usage of the stamp. And you do that quite well, very well done. Got archival material, including a singed copy of a proof from Perkins Bay on the fire. That's pretty cool. And you end with fiscal use of the stamp on documents. Excellent knowledge shown. And you're showing something I think that's important for people to see, that you are showing your personal research and how that is correcting some previously published material. I think that's an A+ on that part. However, the full sheets you use and large blocks, you really need to have a good reason to be using those. Now, it's okay to show one to see the size of the plate, etc. And if it's printed several different times with different plates, you can show one for each plate. But if you're going to show any more, they got to be a good reason. Most of the reasons that we see these is to see the position in the plate of a flaw. And if so, you got to show me where in that plate that flaw is. And there are various techniques to do that. And we can talk about how you do that. You got some very nice pieces, and you need to draw some discrete attention to the rare pieces that you have. Overall, I think the exhibit could be shrunk by about a frame, because you do have a lot of space used by, again, those large pieces that are somewhat redundant, and maps and other sparse pages in there. I think you can probably get a real tight exhibit and maintain or improve your result. But it's a very, very nice exhibit. I enjoyed it quite a bit. And I think I've covered everything that I have written. Yes, sir?
228, Cochin, Imperial.
Oh,
Okay. The title of this exhibit is Postal History of Imperial Mail in 19th Century Cochin, which received a gold medal. The structure and treatment within the exhibit is basically a markophily of Cochin, or Imperial Cochin, showing each of the markings from the Imperial Postal Service in Cochin. As such, it isn't postal history. So the markophily treatment is totally logical. It makes a great deal of sense. It provides for a very logical layout and plan. However, it doesn't follow directly from the title. So we would suggest you revisit one or the other of the title and simply make a change to the wording of the title. A second aspect which we think you might want to look again is on your title page, you divide your 16-page one-frame exhibit into 21 sections that you define. You basically go through each of the markings one by one and define each as a separate section. Simplify the plan. A number of those markings really are, to say the same is not the right term, but they fall into very clear categories. There are the pre-stamp marks. There are the markings, for example, in the sort of 54 type period. Then, for example, there would be all India cancellations, which you subdivide on an equal footing. And there are 3 or 4 all India cancels, each as a separate section of apparently equal scope, equal depth. Take those 21 sections, come up with maybe 4 or 5 that are cohesive and yet distinct from each of the others. Obviously, again, apart from the 21 sections, you have a lot that you want to say about the covers, a lot you want to say about the markings. Cut it back. There are so many words on each of the pages. You spend a lot of time conveying that information. We all spend a lot of time reading that information. Make it like a newspaper. You can read the headings. Yes, you want to convey as much knowledge and as much information and as much detail as you can, but make it brief, make it succinct, make it easy to follow. One of the questions we had, you talked about on the title page, annotations, and yet it felt that as you moved through those 16 pages, you didn't come back to that term. On the title page, you said, I want to talk about annotations. It wasn't totally clear what you meant, and when we went through the remaining 15 pages, it didn't seem you actually did anything with it. I think you were talking about too lates, instructional marks, registry marks. I'm not quite sure what you meant by annotations.
If you like, I can answer. Yeah.
That would be great.
Yeah.
I was curious what you meant.
Yeah, it was in the very slide 1 and slide 2. This is the pre-stamp period, the pre-adhesive, pre-cancellation. There was no postmarks at that time. It's only annotations. So that's what I meant.
Okay, so manuscript markings. Manuscript markings. Okay. Again, I think what the conclusion from that would be, look at some of the terminology that you use and keep it within, should we call it established words. Terminology, that's it. Tim's always articulate. I think it would be helpful, again, maybe tomorrow if we can go through and we can kind of tease out some of the things that you want to do with this. Again, I would summarize it and say, you know, you've got a gold medal, you did a lot of things well, you did a lot of things effectively. There are just a few things that it would be helpful if you revisit it.
Thank you.
Okay.
He's the first-time exhibitor, getting gold.
That makes it even better.
Yeah.
You 243, canal zone errors and their origin. Jim, I haven't heard from you in a while.
I see 4 or 5 of my people sitting out there and I'm just waiting for them.
They're lying in wait.
Typesetting, printing, and plate varieties and errors on the flat plate U.S. stamp silver print canal zone. First of all, it's a most excellent title page. In fact, you got the award as the best title page in the Expo for the judges. Congratulations on that. On your first page, which are your plate varieties, the strip of 3 of the 5 centimeters developed in the 2 blocks are really somewhat overwhelming. And I think that you could easily omit those because you show those same plate varieties on the canal zone stamp itself. And was some discussion in the jury about this, but I personally like that you show what we call in Eastern Europe the mother stamp, and what's going on with the mother stamp that you're putting overprint on. And to dedicate one page to that, I think is certainly fine. And I think here where you show that plate writing on the canal zone is fine and much appreciated. You show excellent philatelic knowledge throughout, and the explanation of the varieties and errors and the personal research is noted and much appreciated. That there is obviously on your part much original work done on this. The split that you have between typesetting, the printing and plate varieties and errors, I like that distinction with the three categories and made the exhibit very easy to follow. The other thing I appreciated about it is that your use of your large multiples. Too often they overwhelm and spill all over the place, but you place those very well within the exhibit. And something for, I think, for others to emulate, to take a look how you did it. That was very, very good. The rarity of the material, some of that material is just outstanding. So that also is much appreciated by the jury. Presentation, clean and clear. Much more than that, just would like to add to that, so congratulations, very wonderful.
Husband, believe you would?
Yeah. Frame 225, the Latvia provisionals.
It's Colin, I was just giving him a break.
Okay. Handcrafted provisional cancellations of Latvia. Okay. A single frame gold medal exhibit. The comments may seem very specific, and I think that's reflective of the fact that this is a very good, very well accomplished exhibit. But I think the minor points are still significant. In terms of presentation, you use a maroon border for the important item in the exhibit. Maybe it's the lighting in the hall, or it's maybe my short-sightedness. I think there was only one maroon border, and it was kind of hard to find in the light. You normally seem to use like a brown, and the brown and the maroon I found very hard to differentiate. Maybe one or the other needs to change. If the idea is to highlight the important items, then some greater degree of differentiation is needed. Secondly, sections 2 and 3. Maybe it was just very early in the morning for me. I was having a very hard time as I was studying, differentiating between sections 2 and 3 and the words you used on the title page and in the synopsis. Now, for the benefit of everybody else, section 2, if I understood it correctly, were rubber cancellations, but simple ones. So like a straight line or some form of very basic pattern. Section 3 was somehow more complicated rubber markings or cork or wood or steel or blah, 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 blah. I would try, or I would suggest that you want to revisit sections 2 and 3 and somehow make the differences either more apparent or more logical. Because is the question we're looking at what the mark was applied with the material, or is it somehow the sophistication or simplicity of the mark? And we seem to kind of flip-flop between the two in sections 2 and 3. And I think you did it yourself, where in some cases you were talking about the material with which the mark was applied, and in some cases you were talking about the geometrics of the mark. And again, I think I would just go back and look at that yourself and see, am I really doing what I think I'm doing. Because I think there's a little bit of flipping back and forth. Again, just as a minor observation about the use of language, handcrafted provisional cancellations. Some cases you talk about cancellations, some cases you talk about obliterations. Some of the covers are stampless covers. Some of the markings are on covers, but they're not used to cancel, they're not used to obliterate. They are some sort of ancillary mark on the cover. Again, just tighten up the use of language. As we talked about with Cochin exhibit, if you use a term for something, try and make sure as you progress through the exhibit that you're really using the right word in the right context. Again, these observations, they're minor. It doesn't significantly detract from what is a very good exhibit with some very important covers. But again, I think if you focus on some of those details, I think you will feel happier with the exhibit as it looks. But I think the key thing is go back to that section 2 and 3 and just look at what you're saying in differentiating those two sections. That I think is the key thing for you to take home with.
234, Swartz's City Dispatch, pertaining to the local folks of Cotton Square.
That's me, Larry. Let's see. As usual, we were terribly impressed by your material. Stunningly rare material, great research. Read 3 of the 4 articles that got published in time for the show. Do you happen to know the 4th installment is to be published?
It's in the next issue.
One of in a single frame exhibit has been, the analogy is that it's akin to a short story. And a short story is a succinct story in a very small number of pages. So a single frame exhibit tells an absolutely complete story in the 16 pages. Given the articles that you've written, and I know what you've collected to a certain extent, the material as it is really begs for treatment in a multi-frame exhibit. And you condensed it, more of the Reader's Digest condensed version to fit 16 pages with what is a somewhat contrived scope. That said, the exhibit is great material, great display of knowledge, superb material, but it's not a satisfying story for a 16-page exhibit. The material really begs for a full exposition showing the production of each of the, because he's showing, it's 16 different stamps, essentially, in 16 pages. It really begs to be shown as a multi-frame exhibit. You know what an excellent single-frame exhibit is, because you've got 2 in the COC. 3. So you know what an excellent single-frame exhibit is, and you've set the bar for yourself very high. And this is not as satisfying for other exhibits.
Thank you.
Yes.
Oh, he's still going.
Yeah.
Here's partial report.
Ah, that's mine. Written postage rate reforms 1837, 1840. Single frame received a gold medal. It's an interesting premise. And here's one of those premises that the exhibitor has put forth. that he's going to show us examples of the rates at a very critical time in British history, 1837, 1840, where the rates are going to move from 4 pence and distance rates into the penny post or penny black and already envelope. And he's going to do it just by using one county as an example. And he's going to do it by using just a single letter. No complex or heavy materials. And you do it brilliantly. I do have a couple of small things. Postal history, rarity in postal history is one of those things that I've got a cover that was mailed last Thursday from Alamo to Pittsburgh. That could be a one only. But it's not all that nifty because the next day I also mailed something from Alamo to Pittsburgh. So what I'm getting at is that you're talking about some of your rare material where it's the only or one of a few that were mailed in that county to that destination during that time period. I say, well, that's good. It's good material to illustrate that with. I take that sort of thing with a grain of salt because you've already boxed in your premise, so it's the population you're choosing from is pretty small anyway. So that's just a point that, in my personal opinion, it's not that big a deal. However, it's a beautiful exhibit. I encourage you all to look at. The technique is excellent. It's logically developed and complete. Significant personal research is noted and appreciated. One more thing that got me was the first sentence. This is a special study. There ain't no such thing as a special study, as we say colloquially. There used to be a category called special study in the manual, but that got deleted, and especially when you're talking about a one-frame exhibit, they're all kind of special. They all kind of do their own thing, and there's a wide open arrangement on how you do it. So anyway, it's not a real category of exhibit. It's a postal history exhibit. It's a rate study is what it is. And you're using Suffolk as a microcosm, and it's perfectly logical as it is. You know, it's a special exhibit. It's not a special study as far as those words have a special meaning, as we were talking about words with a meaning. So, other questions or comments do you have? Talk to me later if you like.
Yeah, we will just.
I'd love you to walk me through that. Yeah.
238.
Tim, Boxer Rebellion. Is that yours, Sandy?
Yes.
Well, it would have helped us a little bit, Sandy, if we'd have known what the heck the exhibit was going to be. I mean, you know, we didn't really know what to expect, and as it turns out, we got a perfectly fine and excellent title page in the frames when we got here. But outside of that, we were immensely impressed with the quality of the material. It's what you did with that was superb. Minor things to play with and clean up the scans. Let me get my notes here because I've been too busy to get all this written down. The only other thing I would ask, I mean, you know, what can you say about the exemplary material? Is how was the overprint and or surcharge? How was the overprint applied? And if it was done one-off, like some places that they did have, little mini hand type press. As the pressure on the letters increased, there was damage and or movement on the form, and they actually had to replace letters, sometimes changing font. I mean, that's where the O came from. Because you're showing us wrappers around 16 and 8 cards, so I'm assuming that they didn't have an entire sheet to be able to do a press form. So they were doing these one-off. I would just pose to you, how are they done?
These were all done single
Yeah.
operation, because these cards were already cut and available.
Right, yeah, as the wrappers indicate.
Right.
Yeah, so that was my guess, and maybe you should you should or could surmise how these errors occurred, because obviously, well, maybe not obviously, maybe they have 5 of these things and people were doing them all at the same time, but I kind of think based upon my work with surcharges where there's only a hand press and there's only like 6 pieces with the C, E, F, and the 3 periods. Tremendous pressure put on those pieces of type, and damage happens and or movement occurs. Maybe you could figure out if there is some sort of evolutionary basis on that. Just a thought.
My belief is that they were typeset.
In a single press.
Right, yeah.
Right, yeah. So I mean, they would put the card in, put the card in,
Exactly.
and as they were doing that, there was starting to
There
be
was
damage, and
movement.
they replaced the C
Right.
incorrectly with an O. If there's any way you can do an evolution of that, like we did in the Orange Free State cards on VRI surcharges, we surmised that as the damage occurred and they started replacing font, things
Right.
changed.
Right, exactly.
There's probably not enough material out there to be able to do that, but I was
No.
just curious. You might at least tell us how it was done when you get in there. But yeah, beautiful, wonderful exhibit.
Thank you.
It really, truly was. And next time, send in the damn title.
Promise.
Yes.
268,
0. It's 268, a building medallion envelope designed and used for 47 years, received a silver.
Go back there. Okay. This, on your title page, which is nice, and your introduction that you write on that title page says that you're going to look at this envelope that was produced by Harper, it's actually Harper's Magazine, right? But over a course of 40 years, and you're going to study this envelope. And that falls under our category of illustrated mail. It's a great subject for it. Very good. But once we get into the exhibit, we have a little problem. It's all organized by the stamps that appear on the cover. The focus on your exhibit should be on those envelopes. In other words, you should try and organize it by design, by range of usage of that envelope, something that moves us forward. I understand using the issue of the stamp does give us a somewhat chronological order to the exhibit. And that's about all it does, because the actual stamp that hit that cover is irrelevant to what you're really trying to say you're studying. So the focus has got to be on that design, on that envelope. And I really challenge you to reorganize your chapters into something that deals with that envelope, not just the happenstance chronology of the stamp that they happen to use to make it. Your focus has to be on that design. And when you start doing that, keep it, that whole premise, focus on the design, then we want more knowledge, Shannon, about that design. Come on, give us some kind of guesstimate on how long this particular design was in use, if it was, if you can. I realize it's tough on some of those, but any kind of delineation, any kind of limits you can put on that shows us that you've studied this much more is only going to help you. It's really good. I think it's impressive, all of these that you brought together. It's impressive to see the changes in the envelope, or the lack of changes in some cases. One thing that you're trying to show us that doesn't quite work is the items that they're listing for sale in the price schedule that's in the background of every envelope. And you reproduce it in a colored block on the lower half of the page. That doesn't work. In fact, some of your colored blocks are harder to read to us than the actual envelope. My point, and actually reproducing the oval with the building in it, is not helping you any. It's eating up space. Get rid of it. I'm serious. And you can point out the changes in price or whatever in text, perhaps, but the way you're doing it is not helping you. Secondly, drop the pictures, the collateral, as we would call it, that don't associate with that envelope. They're not helping you along that focus has to be on the envelope. And tell us the story of how they use these things, why they changed them, when the prices went up, and therefore they had to change the envelope. Anything you can tell us about it. You know, that's got to be your primary focus on it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other, yes?
Making comments on C?
No, we don't.
Okay.
We don't want to reveal anything. Secret stuff. No, they don't get a critique sheet either. You've already won the big prize. Other questions? Okay.
Is it back ready?
I believe I've got an agent in the back who's requested the first one, and then we'll get to you, and then Sandy, and then the young lady in front, or maybe even the young lady in front earlier.
207.
207, the hand-painted cachets for the 1946 Smithsonian commemorative received a Vermeil medal. It is a visually stunning exhibit. There were some things about it. The treatment, he will get a written sheet like this, just about everything I've got to say. But the treatment was, he adopted as treatment of the hand-painted cachet makers by popularity. And by popularity, he defined it as agreed amongst people who collect this material. Well, that's interesting, but it looked like random stuff to me, and some of the other judges also remarked upon it that yes, that was pretty much to popularity, but it just it seemed a little odd, and we would accept that, but that statement doesn't appear anywhere in the exhibit. It appears in the synopsis, which is good for the judges, but it's bad for the viewing public. So just as an idea, he should put it on the plan page right there by the plan, saying here are the people I'm going to show you in the order I'm going to show you, and it's by popularity for collectors of the area, if that's what he wants to do. Other people, such as the next door neighbor in 208, did it just alphabetically by cachet maker, which is a very simple way to follow the treatment. Excellent knowledge of all aspects is presented, and significant rare items, especially the production techniques of how these hand-painted cachets are made, showing the Dorothy Knapp sketch in the graphite, and how she transferred the sketch to the envelope so she could do a few of those by just tracing that out, and then coming back in with the watercolors and the pen and ink to make the cover. I thought that was a fascinating and very instructive part of it. I also felt, though, that on page 1 and page 10, that there were items in there that would be good for an article on the subject, but as far as an exhibit item, not so much. There's a receipt on page 1, and on page 10 there's a letter that was an enclosure in one of the things. Like we've said before, you choose a subject and you put it in your title, and we expect to see the stuff that's in the exhibit relates to that title. And he's talking about the hand-painted cachets and not the receipts purchasing a cachet. So it's not, it's tangential to the subject and it's using up space. Now I can understand, because there's such a limited population of these covers, that he may need to fudge it a little bit by putting some items in there to fill up that space. But he's been found out that that's the case. That's all I have, and I'm happy to see him, and my colleague Daryl, who does that sort of thing, wants to talk or speak.
Following up on what he just said about somewhat of the dearth of material that's available for this exhibit, the exhibitor is not doing himself any favors because he's using 3 pages per row and stretching out however many covers. I think we counted 18 or so. Now, in a one-frame exhibit, he's coming off looking pretty sparse. That's an impression thing, just from looking at it. But that also gives us a clue that does he really have enough stuff to cover what he's trying to do? Or is his subject so small and so narrow that it's not even going to fill 1 frame? And then he's got another kind of issue. So he needs to think about that. I mean, when you think the universe of saying, in a 1-frame cover, in a 1-frame exhibit, I've got 16 pages. If I can put 2 covers per page and ignore the title page, that gives me 30 covers I should have in there, more or less. And he's not coming close to that. Now, I'm not saying your exhibit should have 30 covers, no. But I'm saying the fact that there's a lot of white space, the fact that he's only using 3 pages per row, even though they're big ones, makes you think, well, there's a lot of space being wasted. It should be showing us Philadelphia itself.
It's an interesting observation is that many wood-frame exhibits that we see are actually 17 or 18 pages or 12 or 14 pages, but we've got 16 to work with, so we're either seeing them squeezed or stretched. There are a number of them that fit nicely to 16, but they're hard to come by. Yes, sir?
Frank 213, Union Patriotic cover.
Jim?
What did that get?
That got a silver. Sorry, thank you.
Union Patriotic covers. The title page gives some excellent information on patriotics, what they were used for. However, my first suggestion is to change the title of the exhibit from Union Patriotic covers used with the 10-cent issue to change it to the 10-cent 1861 used on patriotic covers. And on the second page, he starts up by telling us the difference between type 1 and type 2, which is a good piece of information. But then after that, he needs to focus more on the postal history aspects of the covers. If he decides to range it by patriotics, I mean, you know how many Union patriotics there are. And he's showing us only 1 cover per page, so it's actually 16 pages. But it's really, in my mind, he's showing us 8 pages because he could put 2 on a page. But the stress, for instance, once again, the postal history elements, the arbitrary distinction between East and West in Canada, you might want to revisit that to see if there's a better postal history way of showing that. As he gets more covers, perhaps a good way to split that up is to show them by the categories of patriotics. As you know, if you look in Sherman's book, there are different categories of patriotics, how you have your Lincolns, your state, your Constitution, and to divide it that way within the context of the 10-cent green. Difficulty of acquisition is appreciated. I know these aren't common, but they are available. Condition for the period, a lot of these covers during the Civil War tend to be fairly ratty, but the condition is good for the period. So basically, there's a lot of space to fill in here, and I would suggest he gets more material, and then once again, we'll do a more postal history development of the exhibit.
right here.
Oh, there you are, you moved over.
Well,
I've only got a couple of minutes.
I know, and I've got 12, so I guess I'm just.
I guess you better save some room at your table tonight.
Yeah.
Everybody's gonna get a form back. So
Can I just ask for one?
ask for one.
All right, that is 262. No, sorry, 256.
How did I know that was the one you wanted to ask about?
It's my father.
I know. The Sunday State port fee adhesives got over May. It's a very unusual and interesting and well-developed revenue adhesive study, except there's no documents involved, and the documents do exist, and it would make a much niftier exhibit. Of course, it won't fit in 16 frames if you start putting documents in there, so you understand that. The other thing I had, it's very instructive, by the way, a good deal of personal study and research. The exhibitor talks about developing a number of types that are his correction of the standard work in the area, and I'm not going to dispute that with him, but some of the types that he's showing seem to be the only difference in the type from one to the other, or one subtype to the other, is the change in the year. And I don't consider that really a strong type. Some of the other types he shows are actually a change in format, there's a change in format or a particular spot of color that is on that period after the R or whatever. Those are actually subtypes or full types. But just changing the year in the adhesive, I don't believe makes it a type. Which was just, that was the year, that was the issue there. Those are the, that's all I really have to say. You'll see the rest of it on there, but it's quite interesting.
Can you make the first responder for agents available, the name of the first responder for other exhibits?
I'd be happy to. Where's this mine? Which other?
261.
261 is Tony.
227.
227 is Tony.
260.
260 is Tony. Tony, why don't you see Sandy?
255.
No, 260 is Timothy.
Which one was the other one?
255.
255 is Colin.
And then 226.
226 is Tony.
231
is me.
237.
Tim.
257
is Jim.
205.
205 is Daryl.
261.
261 is Tony. I just did that.
256.
I just gave you that one. That was good.
256 is yours?
Yeah, I just read it too.
Oh. And 229.
229. So that's it. You got everybody. I want to thank everyone for their participation. We'll have a